Thanks again, Paul. Welcome, everybody. Today we will be talking about the open source MacOSLib project. And I'm going to start with pointing out the forum post that I made a little earlier that has some links and information that I'll be talking about today. If you want to go take a look at that, I will be putting those all in context in a little bit. So, what is MacOSLib? It is an open source project that implements the Mac Toolbox. As you know, the Mac Toolbox is the collection of utilities and functions that Apple provides that makes life easier for programmers. It provides a common collection of core routines that basically make all Mac programs kind of look and act like every other Mac program. And Xojo implements a lot of that already internally. It uses native controls, which is actually in the background is using a lot of this toolbox, which is great, which is helpful, but doesn't give you access to everything. So what MacOSLib does is try to give you access to more. It translates the classes and methods that you find in the Mac Toolbox to Xojo classes to make them easier to use. And it's mostly a true mapping of the Apple classes, meaning that if Apple provides a function X, we provide a class called whatever with a function X in it. And sometimes we make the function names more descriptive or add a couple of additional functions for convenience, but it's mostly true. Once you import the MacOSLib project into your own, and I'll show you how to do that, you use them similar to how you'd use them in Objective-C. Now let me stop here and say I am not an expert on Objective-C, far from it. I'm not an expert on the Mac Toolbox, far from it. I got involved in the project basically because I was pestering Charles, who started the project, about unused variables and parameters. And eventually he said, well, why don't you just fix these yourself? And that's how I came on board, and then I started contributing actual code. So it's similar to how you'd use the toolbox in Xcode, except all the memory management is handled for you within the classes. I'm going to stop for a question. Is it needed to learn Objective-C? Do you need to learn Objective-C to use MacOSLib? No, you don't. These are all Xojo classes and functions. You'd use it just like you'd use any other Xojo classes and functions. The Toolbox is very deep and expansive, and that's another way of saying complicated. And so what we also endeavor to do is make it simpler. So in addition to a true mapping of the toolbox, there's a bunch of convenience methods within the project that hopefully reduce multiple steps down to the one or two that you need. And I'll show you that too. Those convenience methods are next to the core package and not required to use the core package, but it could be helpful. The people who maintain, I listed the people who maintain the project here in the forum post. So shout out to Vidal, who I think is part of the presentation today, the audience. Now, you say the last entry here is you, because this is an open source project, and anyone can contribute. And on the site, which I'll show you in a moment, it gives you instructions on how to contribute. And basically, you would clone the repo to your own system. You'd make changes. You'd submit those changes. All the changes are reviewed, commented on, sometimes brutally. And if they're in keeping with the goal of the project, then they're accepted and incorporated into the project. Sorry, bear with me 1 second. My question window keeps going in the background, so I want to make sure that I can see that. Okay, so in a nutshell, it'll give you access to Otherwise, hidden properties and features of various uh, controls on a window or in the window itself. Xojo's goal is to make their product cross-platform. So there are the things that they do are the common features that are available in all the platforms. And sometimes they go a little further than that, but for example, they introduce AppleScript, which is only available on the Macs. But for the most part, they stay true to that philosophy. Every platform has stuff that the Toolbox provides that it can do on its own platform that Xojo, for whatever reason, decide not to incorporate it into the main language, but you can incorporate pretty easily through something like MacOSLib. Often, if you're a member of the forums and you're browsing and you're looking for a particular function, you'll see people say, well, you can do what you're looking for by using declares. Well, that's what MacOSLib does, is it incorporates all those declares for you, so you don't have to do the coding yourself. By using the Toolbox directly, you can also manage to make Mac apps that are more Mac-like. And I'll leave that to you to explore what features that is, but we all know that there are certain controls and features that you might see in other Mac programs that aren't directly available in Xojo, but through the Toolbox you can make those available. For example, if you want to colorize the text in a text area, or have a proxy icon in your document window, stuff like that. Now, the MacOSLib code is specifically for the Mac, but we have all the pragmas in there, so you can throw the project into your own project, and it will compile on all the platforms. It won't help you on the other platforms, but it won't give you a compiler error either.
Cam, if I can interrupt, are you displaying a keynote on the screen? Since I see the keynote.
I am not. I'm reading right now. I'm not displaying anything. I'm just
okay.
I'm reading my notes because I'm going to be.
I wanted to make sure the screen sharing was working properly. So
Yeah,
we should be seeing the Safari window right now.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, great.
That's right. This is all just part of introduction. I'm going to be jumping into it in just a moment.
Fabulous.
And in fact, I'm going to jump into it right now. So the main repository is at GitHub, and I provide the link in the forum post, and it's right here. And you can access it in a number of ways. You can download a zip file, or you can clone it to your desktop. You can fork it to your own repo. And if you're going to contribute, the best way to do it is to fork it to your own GitHub repo and make changes and then submit them through GitHub. There are other repos available, for example, mine. And this is significant because not every change is incorporated into the main project, and so I may make a change or addition that doesn't actually make it to the main project, or maybe I'm still in the middle of it, so I haven't submitted it. And but I'll tell people about it. Oh, I put that into my repo. You can come get my repo just as easily as you can get the main repo. There are some people who subscribe to both, or even all the different repos out there. Okay, so let's jump right into it. Once you've downloaded it, you will get your MacOSLib repo. Let me see if I can actually show this to you. And it will look something like that. And it's in version control format. So what you do is you'd open this file right here, the MacOSLib RBVCP. Now you'll notice that's the old format. To keep backward compatibility, at least for now, the project is maintained and developed in Real Studio. However, it is tested in Real Studio going back a few versions and also into all the current versions of Xojo. Let me move this off the screen. And when you open it, you get this. Let me pause here for a moment to see if there's any questions I need to deal with. I'm asked a very specific question about what you can do with specific controls in a Xojo project, I don't know the answers to all those questions, so I'm not going to address them directly. Only to say that stuff like that, post a question in the forum. I might not know, but there are, as you know, we have a very robust community, and somebody will have the answer, and we'll be able to point you in the direction of a toolbox function that will do what you want. And then somebody else will say, yeah, MacOSLib can do that for you. Oops. Okay. Okay, so once you open the MacOSLib project, you'll see on the side there's a MacOSLib folder. There's additional modules. There's examples, and then there's the application itself. From the point of view of a user, you don't need to worry about the application itself. This is the stuff that basically MacOSLib is incorporated into an example project, and this is the stuff that's needed for a project, the app class and the windows and so on and so forth. The most important thing here is the MacOSLib folder. To put this into your own project, you would copy it, start a new project, and then paste. It is an extensive library, so the paste is not instant, and so you'll get the spinning wheel, and it only takes about 10 seconds or so. And there it is, and that's how you get it into your own project. Strictly speaking, that is all you need. Before I get into the meat of this, the additional modules, there's a bunch of additional classes that rely on MacOSLib, but MacOSLib does not rely on, that give you some useful features. For example, there's the authorization shell. That is a way of executing command line functions as an admin or root, but where it asks you for the password in a standard dialog. There are class extensions, all kinds of class extensions, dictionary, and you can see the whole list here. There are Thomas Templeman's smart preferences, including the XML dictionary, which will convert a plist into a dictionary and vice versa. There's my plist stuff, which will make working with plists hopefully a little easier, and the Mac System Profiler, which gives you easy access to all the information in the Mac System Profiler, and a bunch of other things that you can explore. You can pick and choose from the additional modules as you need them. Some stuff is dependent on other stuff, and you'll determine that if you introduce, for example, one class extension and it says missing functions, you have to find those functions and introduce other class extensions, or just give up and introduce the whole thing. We do not worry about namespaces in this project, so I don't recommend throwing this all in one shot. You might cause conflicts with your other methods and functions. But it's all there for you to explore. You can also pick and choose the main MacOSLib project. The MacOSLib folder, which is right here. And you see that there are various parts of the toolbox that have been implemented, and I'll get back to this in a moment. And you can pick and choose from here, but I recommend that you don't. Just take this whole MacOSLib folder and throw it into your project. One, it'll be easier to replace it as new versions of MacOSLib come out. Two, that there are dependencies that once you start picking and choosing, you're going to have to worry about, and it becomes a real headache to do it piecemeal. And third, because Xojo does dead code stripping, the modules that you put in here that aren't used are going to be stripped out of your final application anyway. So there's really no reason not to do it that way. Okay. Let me pause for a moment, check questions. The answer, the question again is, can you enhance a Xojo control with MacOSLib? Yes, you can, by giving access to the native features that are available in the toolbox. Okay, so what's in here? How do you even get started with this? Well, let me hide this for a moment. one of the links I gave you was to the Mac developer library, which is where Apple provides all the documentation for their Toolbox. And this thing is as massive as the Toolbox. So when you first get here, you see something like this, which in the grand scheme of things, unless you're a student of this, it's pretty meaningless. But you might have an idea in mind. So for example, you might say, oh, I wonder if I can introduce a date picker, a native date picker, into my project. If you type in date picker, and the search shows you a bunch of things. There's a Cocoa people picker that works with the address book. Cool. I might come back to that. There's sample code for a date picker. There's an NS date picker cell delegate. Well, that's not quite, but oh, here, wait. We have an NS date picker cell. Okay, getting closer. Oh, here we go. An NS date picker class reference. So that we know there's an NS date picker. And if we click on that, we go to the information about it. We see all the instance methods, and these are the equivalent of class methods in Xojo. And we see a bunch of things. Anything with a colon next to it takes parameters. Stuff without a colon does not take a parameter. Just some Objective-C information. If you see something like this, bool is bordered, the function name is bordered, and it returns a Boolean. Locale, the function name is locale, and it returns an NS locale. Where it says void, it doesn't return anything. So this is this equivalent of a method. Set bordered is a method. And these are suddenly all methods right in front of me. But you get the idea. So if it says something like bool in front, that's a function. A moment while I check something here. Sorry about that. Okay. Okay, so we found our NS date picker. So we know there's an NS date picker class. NS actually refers to the stuff in Cocoa. So some quick reference. If it starts with NS, it's Cocoa, and if it starts with CF, it's Core Foundation. Okay, so let's go over back to the MacOSLib project. And we open this up, and we see there's Cocoa right here. So let's open this up. That's a module. It has classes. And as I scroll down, I see, oh, there it is, NS date picker. Somebody implemented this. And if we look over here, we see it's an NS control. And if I look up here, I see, okay, well, that's an NS control, so it's based on that. Oops, one, NS control. And we see NS control is based on a canvas. Beautiful. Now we know how to add it to a window. We add a canvas, and then we change the super to an NS date picker. Very quickly, if we open this up and we see what the methods are, we see that there's background color and date value that can be used as properties, and then we see a bunch of properties, all computer properties, bezel, bordered. And if we go back to the documentation, we see here that, oh, I just lost it, but oh, here, is bezeled, is bordered. So you see what I mean about it's an almost true mapping. The functions are there, but we left off the is. You also see that there's probably a lot more here than was actually implemented. Not everything is implemented. The most important or most relevant things were implemented. If something is missing that you feel is needed, it would be a good time to implement it yourself and introduce it to the project. If we actually look at one of these methods, for example, the background color, you see that we use the pragmas to limit it to Cocoa. We put the declares in, and that's how this is all implemented. All based on a fundamental structure that handles all the the pointers for you and keeps track of the memory and releases it when needed. Okay, so that's how you find things in the project, basically by asking questions, searching the documentation, asking questions on the forum, and then you'll find it in the project, and then you want to implement it in your own project, which we'll do in a moment. But before I do that, let me actually run the MacOSLib example project. And there it is. This was done by Stefan, if I'm not mistaken, and he did a brilliant job. There are some PDFs with some additional information, the version history, if you care, and then these buttons that give you information about how to install. They're basically reviewing a lot of stuff I just told you, stuff that you can read on your own. The most important thing here are these examples. I doubt that everything in the project has an example, but there's a lot of neat stuff. So for example, if you were interested in the authorization shell, well, here's a window implementing it. So you can go look at this window and see how it was done so you can put it into your own project. If you look under Cocoa, there's a bunch of things related to Cocoa, including this NS date picker. And you see that there are different styles that you can use, and if you want a different background. And this was all implemented for you so you can actually look at the code and see how to introduce it into your own project. So those examples can be extremely handy as a guide. Okay, so put this away. And we'll turn our attention to the project that I posted a link to in the forum, which I called Show Off, which is a way to show off MacOSLib. Basically, this project started as a new project. I copied and pasted the MacOSLib folder in here, as I described earlier, and then I built this main window. For simplicity, I put everything into this main window, mostly because I didn't want to implement a window menu. So if I run this, take a look at some of the things we put in here. The macOS is very into transparency, so you can actually set the transparency of a window. And you see that that doesn't actually affect the controls, just the window itself. Affecting the controls would be up to you. I just want to give you an idea of what this would involve. Icons. You can actually have the system do the selected version of an icon for you or the disabled version. It will handle that for you through system calls. Here's the date picker that I mentioned. And as I change the date, it throws onto this log what date I'm changing it to. This is in string format. This is not the only way you can get it, but this is the string value that it returns. This is a search field. This is a standard search field that you'll see in various windows. It does everything. It does all of this for you. So you throw it onto the window like you would any other control. You implement the action event, and as you type, I notice as I pause, it triggers the action event. Okay, let me pause here to see if there's any questions I should take a look at. Okay. Okay, so let's take a look at the code behind some of this stuff. And before I do that, Paul, you'd wanted me to pause near the halfway point for poll questions, if I remember correctly?
Yeah, if this is a good stopping point, I can run the polls real quick.
Yeah, this is a good point.
Okay, great. Let's just run a few polls here. The usual ones if you've been here to other webinars, but we like to collect data like this. So let's start up some of these. I'll leave them up for about 30 seconds and then close them and move on to the next one. All right, that one seems ready. All right, and last poll. All right, great. Thank you, everyone. Back to you, Kem.
Thanks, Paul. One last thing I forgot to show off in the project is the notification center. Now, this is something that I can imagine would be very handy for some of you, and that's taking advantage of the macOS notifications. I turn on my notification manager. And if you notice in the upper right corner of my screen, I hit the notify button and it notifies me. And every time I do it, I get a new notification. I'm going to review the code for all of these. Turn that off. Okay, so let's start with the transparency. Let me open this in its own window. And let's open the slider. This is a standard Xojo slider, and this is the entire code. Now, because Xojo uses native controls, there is a corresponding Toolbox class or object for everything that Xojo provides. For a window, the corresponding object is a NS window. And we've tried to introduce conversions where it makes sense. So you can create an NSW as an NS window and assign that to self. I'm sorry, assign self to that. And that basically converts the window to its NS window equivalent. Well, it converts the wrong word. It gives you access to the window as an NS window. I calculate the value of the slider, and I simply use the property NSW transparency equals. And that's it. And then I update the label. So transparency is simply a property of NSW along with a bunch of these other things. And because this is just another view on your existing window, you are accessing all of these. You are assigning this to the existing window and modifying the existing window. And again, I'll leave that to you to explore. But that's all there is. If you need transparency, pretty much that's all there is. Now, I haven't looked, but some of the convenience methods in the project might actually let you say self.transparency. It's entirely possible. You can certainly introduce that in the module with an extends if you wanted to, if it's not there. But this isn't so hard as long as you remember that the window equivalent is the NS window. Okay, back to the layout. The icon. Well, this is just a straight canvas that loads up the icon of regxrx, and the code, when it opens, just assigns the index and invalidates the canvas. The main code is in the canvas itself, in the paint. And this gets a little trickier, so you'd probably have to look at example code. It grabs a new port, which is a CG context graphics port. It grabs the picture as a CG image, rather converts that. Creates the rectangle. Well, I won't read this whole thing to you, but the main here is the state that you want is directly from the menu. It sets the property of this image, which is the CG image, and then tells the port to draw the image. So this is the equivalent to draw picture. Bear with me one moment. I'm just checking something. Okay. Here is the search field. Now you see that it shows up just as a blank box because Xojo has no idea what this is. As far as it's concerned, it's just a canvas subclass. But we set the super to NS search field, so at runtime, it knows how to draw itself. And we just implemented there's events for this. So there's a whole bunch of different events. Some of them are standard to the canvas. But the one that I implemented was the action event, which is what happens when you actually type and pause. And so that all that does is append to the log what I typed. Naturally, you'd have it perform whatever action it should perform when you're doing a search. Now the question came up, yes, that's all well and fine for Mac, but if you're doing a cross-platform app, how do you deal with that? Clearly, if you throw this onto a window that's meant for Windows or Linux, this is going to show up. This is not going to show up at all. It's just a canvas. It'll be there, but there won't be any value to it. So probably the best way to deal with it is to move it off screen, and then put the Windows equivalent in its place. So basically, if you want to do it native controls, and Windows has an equivalent, which I'm sure they do, you'd have three canvases sitting off screen, and depending on the platform, you'd move the right one into place. Okay, here's the date picker, which is the same idea. And I'm actually going to introduce a second one onto the screen. Let's make some space here. And I'm going to show you how we do that. So when I go to the library, you are not going to find NS date picker here. But because we looked earlier and we know it's a canvas subclass, oops, we can throw a canvas onto the screen. Good. And we can make the super NS date picker. Now we have the control on there. We implement it by adding its events. So for opening it, we'll do me, and then if we look, you'll see all the different properties that it accepts. And the one we care about right now is date value, which will do an NS date, which is another object inside the package. And one of the properties, one of the functions there is now, which will return an NS date for right now. We also want to set the style. And I have to look to see if it does. what the property was for that. Yes, it's a constant in the NSDatePicker class. So let's do a clock and calendar. If I run this right now, it's probably going to look horrible because I didn't allot enough space to it. But let's take a look. And there we are. You can see the bottom part of it because I didn't give enough space to it. So let's say now let's use NSDatePicker text field and stepper, which will look better. And finally, as another event, we will implement the action, which is what it'll do when you actually change the date and time. The string value. And there are ways to convert the NS dates. You can get the current date value and convert that to a date, or convert that to a string, however you want. But I'll just use string value. And there's not anything more to it than that. Let me just review some questions at this moment. Pat wants me to point out that there is an equivalent project for Windows, the Windows Functionality Suite, which has, and he says that there's a date picker in there, he thinks. I'm also a contributor to that, but I haven't actually looked at that in a while, so I don't recall if there is one there or not. But that's something else to explore. It's also perhaps a topic for another day. Then the question is there an equivalent for Linux? No, none that I'm aware of, but maybe perhaps somebody else has. Information on that. Finally, for the transparency specifically, I'm asked what version of OS X supports window transparency. I don't know the answer to that, but you can look in the documentation, and it will actually tell you what versions of the OS are needed. Let me see if we can find that quickly. Safari. So if I do this window, then we go to the NS window to class reference. By the way, when you see class methods, that's the equivalent of a shared method in Xojo. Well, I'm not seeing transparency, but for example, if you look at something like set title, you'll see down here it says availability available in OS X 10.0 or later. So basically, this is safe for any version of OS X. This set restoration class, however, needs 10.7 or later, which coincidentally is what Xojo needs to. And that's how you can figure out which features will work in which versions of the OS. We, as a project, go back to OS 10.5. However, we'll probably have to update that soon to make it 10.7. Vidal thinks that transparency is probably available in version 10. Okay. So moving back to this, I showed the transparency, I showed the icon, here's our date picker, did this date field, the notification. Now, this took a couple more steps. What we actually did was I introduced down here an object called the NS User Notification Center. And there are three events associated with this object. Did activate notification, did deliver notification, which gives you feedback from the object. And the only one implemented was this one, should present notification in foreground. Notification Center is meant as a background notification tool. So someone has launched your app and then gone out to check email, and you want to let them know that something is happening, so you issue a notification. By default, those notifications will only appear when your app is in the background. If it's in the foreground, well, presumably the person is looking at your apps, so they don't need a notification. In those cases, this object will present this event and ask, should I present this notification? You're in the foreground. And all you have to do here is return true. Obviously, you can check other conditions, but that's what it's looking for. So the steps here are you throw this object onto the window, the NS User Notification Center, not to be confused with the NS Notification Center, by the way, which is that's a different thing. So the NS User Notification Center, and then we create an instance of NS User Notification. We fill in the properties. Which there are a bunch. And then we tell the N center, which is what I named the NS User Notification object, to deliver that object, deliver that message. Now, if you had to go and code this yourself, I'll give you an idea of what's involved with this. I'm pretty sure Vidal did this, and he did a brilliant job. The NS User Notification Center. These are all the methods that happen behind the scenes that make this all work. And this one particularly is not for the faint of heart. There are other functions in MacOSLib that you could get going with just a few declares, but this is not one of them. This took a lot of work and, quite frankly, some ingenuity to get it going. And Vidal credits a team of brilliant people to help him do this, of which I was not one. Okay, so that is the MacOSLib project, and that is using MacOSLib in your own projects. Let me take a look at if there are any other questions. Once again, if you came in late, on the forums, I had started a topic called Using MacOSLib Webinar, Links and Info. And I had posted the links that I've talked about here and some other information, including the project that I was just showing called Show Off. You can get that right from here from my Dropbox. I'm asked about other Apple technologies, such as iOS and iCloud. Some of that is already built into MacOSLib. There is a lot of overlap because iOS is what you'd call it, a brother of OS X, a subset of OS X, but there's a lot of functions that overlap. So we haven't actually tested, or at least I haven't tested the iOS the functions that should work in iOS in an iOS project. I think we're going to have some work to do. then the question becomes whether we're going to create a different project for iOS or build it into MacOSLib. Those decisions haven't been made yet. I'm asked if there are any guides other than the forum. Well, the forum I highly recommend just to get you pointed to other resources. But if you go explore the Apple developer site, for which you need an account with Apple, but it doesn't have to be a paid account. You just have to start an account with them. They have a massive amount of information if you want to do the reading. And then it's just a question of relating that to how Xojo works. And then I have a couple of questions about the specifics of MacOSLib, specifically about Core Foundation. Yes, if you look, we have the Core Foundation stuff right here, along with those classes. Paul will talk about where the recordings of this will be available. There's no, you're free to use MacOSLib in any capacity that you want. That's all specified on the GitHub page. If I'm nearing the end, so if you have any other questions, you should probably pop them in right now.
I'll jump in to let people know that the recordings, assuming they record successfully, had a little trouble with the last few, are always available on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/GoXojo. There's a whole bunch there. I think we must have about 50 or so at this point. But like I said, we've had a little bit of trouble with some of the recordings not coming through. I'm hopeful this one will work fine, and it should show up on the YouTube channel by the end of the week.
I have one question I do want to address, which is what's the most popular component in macOSLib? I'll tell you how I got started with it, which was the stuff for the Mac App Store. When you release an app to the App Store, it expects your program to do validation of the license, their license, in a certain way, and that stuff is built into the macOSLib library. So it basically reduces it to a few calls. I won't go through that now, but that stuff is in there, and I think that may be how a lot of people actually come to macOSLib and get started with it. Okay, I think that covers everything. I thank you all very much for attending.
All right, thank you, Kem. And I want to remind people we have a few more webinars scheduled in July. Next week is a gaming webinar, and don't expect me to be, writing a clone of Mario Kart or anything like that, but we'll have some games that people have made and a little game I made and a few other things to look at. Be sure to check out the YouTube channel. And I do love having guest speakers at these webinars. So if you are interested and have a topic that you would love to share with others in the Xojo community, by all means, get in touch with me. Thank you, everyone, for attending. And thank you, Kem. Did you have something to add?
I did. This was actually a presentation I gave at the Xojo Developer Conference. The other presentation I gave was on security via obesity. If there's any interest in my doing that one here as well, let Paul know and we'll set it up.
Great. Thank you, Kem. All right. I am hopefully going to stop this webinar and have the recording be saved so that I may get it up to YouTube. Have a great day, everyone.